For 11 years, I arrived before dawn and left long after the hallways emptied. Nexera Cloud wasn't simply my employer, it was the canvas on which I had carved my professional identity. The system that powered financial transactions, hospital records, and aviation logistics bore my fingerprints in every process. I had weathered data breaches, cyber attacks, and last-minute migrations that would have crushed entire departments. Loyalty, I believed, was reciprocal, until the morning I learned it was not. The CEO summoned me into the boardroom under the pretense of a performance review. His usual bravado was replaced by an unsettling stiffness. Without looking at me, he slid a document across the table, avoiding my eyes as though the paper carried a confession. The words on it dismantled 11 years of work in a single sentence. "We're moving in a more charismatic direction," he muttered, as though personality could replace architecture. The door opened, and a man sauntered in wearing designer sneakers that screamed more about lifestyle than logic. I recognized him instantly. An online personality whose podcast thrived on conversations about cryptocurrency enlightenment and manifesting wealth. He had never written a single line of code, yet I was informed he would be taking over engineering operations. His qualifications? A loyal fan base, a smooth voice, and a camera-ready smile. The CEO smiled nervously, as if hoping I would understand the absurdity. He asked me to train this stranger, to hand over a decade's worth of proprietary knowledge like a souvenir. I realized in that moment the company no longer valued competence. They valued attention. I didn't lash out. I didn't plead. I simply nodded, signed the paperwork, and left without fanfare. Some betrayals demand retaliation. Others collapse under their own weight. Nexera Cloud wasn't born from corporate ambition. It evolved out of necessity. When industries demanded faster transactions, safer transfers, and uninterrupted access, we built a system capable of supporting the modern world. It handled aircraft logistics, synchronized patient records across continents, and processed billions in financial assets without blinking. To outsiders, it looked effortless, a sleek dashboard, a few buttons, and a promise of endless scalability. But those who touched the core knew the truth. The cloud breathed like a living organism, reacting, adapting, and occasionally struggling under the weight of global dependency. The board, however, saw none of this. They believed technology succeeded not because it worked, but because people believed it worked. Their new philosophy was simple: visibility is value. If someone could speak confidently about innovation, they assumed innovation existed. They mistook applause for competence, convinced themselves charisma could solve infrastructure, and declared that our future rested on someone the public could connect with. They proudly repeated that technology is secondary, as though uptime were a suggestion, not a requirement. They didn't grasp that if Nexera Cloud went dark, emergency rooms would lose access to medical histories, flights would stall mid-scheduling, and entire banking chains would freeze. A single malfunction could trigger global paralysis. What they also didn't know was that beneath the polished interface lay a labyrinth of legacy scripts, hidden triggers, and a failsafe system I never activated publicly. Not out of secrecy, but out of caution. The board treated the cloud like a brand asset. I treated it like a nervous system, fragile and deeply interconnected. It needed guardianship, not showmanship. They replaced the architect with a performer, not realizing that applause doesn't hold servers together. It merely distracts from the silence before they fail. It didn't take long for the new head of engineering to leave his fingerprints across Nexera Cloud. His first act was cosmetic, yet catastrophic. He insisted the term error log carried negative vibrations and rebranded it as growth reflections. According to him, systems didn't break, they evolved. He then replaced deployment protocols, once precise and time-tested, with pastel-colored motivational slides urging engineers to manifest uptime and trust the journey. What should have been rigorous procedures became a digital vision board. Within days, he called a meeting to announce a revolutionary simplification. He had removed automated alerts because they created unnecessary anxiety among employees. When a senior developer asked how the team would know when something malfunctioned, he responded with a grin. "If the system is nervous, it will tell us." The room fell silent, not out of agreement, but disbelief. Yet no one dared question him. The executives applauded every sentence as if he were unveiling the next moon landing. He later discovered the backup system and, believing it to be an overpriced add-on, terminated it to reduce costs. To him, backups were optional subscriptions, not the only reason Nexera had survived multiple cyberattacks. Without them, Nexera's cloud was flying without wings, counting on luck where architecture once lived. He replaced experienced DevOps staff with interns who quoted him like scripture. Meetings turned into pep rallies. No metrics, no audits, just enthusiasm. The CEO showcased him at conferences as proof Nexera was transforming tech culture. Investors clapped, unaware that the core of their billion-dollar infrastructure was being dismantled piece by piece. By the time anyone realized what had been lost, the damage was beyond repair. Nexera hadn't hired a leader. They had hired a liability with a microphone. The first fracture appeared quietly, almost innocently. A hospital in Chicago reported that its patient records were taking unusually long to load. Doctors assumed it was a minor glitch and carried on, unaware that the cloud wasn't simply slowing, it was suffocating. Within days, the issue spread to other medical networks, forcing emergency rooms to delay treatments while nurses rifled through outdated paper files. It was the kind of chaos Nexera Cloud had been created to eliminate, yet now it was causing it. Simultaneously, global shipment trackers began freezing without explanation. Cargo containers sat idle at ports because no one knew which ones were cleared for departure. Trucks remained parked with perishable goods spoiling inside. Logistics companies sent frantic emails, but inside Nexera's headquarters, the new engineering lead dismissed the alarms as server fatigue. His proposed solution wasn't a system patch. It was a company-wide meditation session to reduce digital stress. Behind the polished dashboards and soothing speeches, the system logs told a different story. Critical nodes were overloading, queues were stacking like dominoes, and the cloud's core databases were seconds from reaching catastrophic thresholds. It was like watching a dam crack while someone painted a motivational mural over it. From my living room, I monitored the public performance and privately recognized every warning sign I had documented months earlier. Vulnerabilities I had flagged repeatedly, ignored because they didn't fit the company's new narrative of effortless innovation, were now morphing into structural failures. Yet instead of addressing them, Nexera doubled down on its illusion. Millions were poured into marketing campaigns boasting unprecedented reliability. The message was loud. The reality was louder. The countdown had started, not because the system was doomed, but because the people running it refused to admit they were. It happened at 3:47 a.m., the quietest moment of the night, when most of the world slept and only machines kept society breathing. Nexera's core cluster, already strained beyond safe limits, finally reached total capacity. Under normal circumstances, this would have triggered automatic backups, redirected traffic to secondary servers, and initiated a preventive cascade I had perfected over years. But those systems were gone, canceled, renamed, or ignored by someone who believed intuition could replace infrastructure. Within seconds, the cloud's heartbeat flatlined. Hospitals attempting to access digital charts were met with blank screens. Surgeons stood idle, unable to retrieve patient histories. In London, aircraft scheduled for international departure remained on runways, their flight paths inaccessible. Banking networks froze mid-transaction, trapping billions of dollars inside suspended operations. It wasn't downtime. It was a digital cardiac arrest that rippled across continents. Executives scrambled to find explanations, but the truth didn't require one. A system that once balanced the world's digital demands had collapsed under the weight of arrogance. Major news outlets interrupted regular programming to announce widespread service disruptions. Analysts speculated about cyberattacks. Governments demanded immediate clarification. Nexera responded with a press statement about unexpected server fatigue, as though the cloud had simply decided to take a nap. Social media erupted with outrage from ordinary citizens unable to access funds, book medical appointments, or check travel schedules. Companies dependent on Nexera Cloud watched years of customer trust evaporate in a single night. The silence from the engineering floor was deafening, the same silence that had once accompanied applause for the podcast host. By sunrise, it was clear. The empire had fallen. Nexera didn't just lose clients. It lost relevance, credibility, and the illusion that charisma could hold the world together. The cloud died. Nexera followed. The morning after the collapse, my phone lit up like a distress beacon. At first, I ignored the calls. By noon, I had received over 40 voicemails, some pleading, others demanding. The tone had shifted from arrogance to desperation. Nexera's leadership, once too busy chasing applause, now scrambled for the one person who could decipher the ruins of their empire. They didn't reach out because they valued my expertise. They reached out because their newly crowned visionary was locked in a bathroom, sobbing, convinced the system could be restored with positive affirmations. According to a former colleague, the podcast host had gathered the remaining engineers in the conference room and asked them to emotionally reconnect with the architecture. When someone mentioned corrupted databases, he suggested they stop projecting fear onto the servers. Moments later, he vanished, found later curled on the floor, begging for someone to undo the crash, as though the cloud were a spilled drink that needed wiping. Meanwhile, the board issued frantic emails insisting I return as a consultant. They even dangled a compensation package, pretending it was generosity rather than self-preservation. What they failed to acknowledge was simple. I no longer had any obligation to fix the mess they created. I had given them warnings, reports, and contingency plans. They had given me applause-free exits and silence. Their desperation grew when clients threatened lawsuits and regulators demanded accountability. Nexera attempted to portray me as inaccessible, implying I lacked empathy. They misunderstood entirely. My silence wasn't spite, it was self-respect. The company that once dismissed me was now chasing the shadow of the man they underestimated. Closure doesn't always arrive with an apology. Sometimes it arrives with missed calls you never bother returning. The fallout didn't arrive as a single explosion. It came as an avalanche of consequences, each heavier than the last. Within 48 hours, Nexera's stock price plummeted so sharply that financial analysts stopped charting projections and started predicting liquidations. Shareholders who once praised the company's innovative marketing strategy now filed lawsuits, accusing the board of negligence and willful ignorance. They demanded to know why critical systems had been entrusted to someone whose expertise peaked at interviewing influencers about digital spirituality. Major clients, whose operations depended on uninterrupted access, severed contracts overnight. Banks brokered emergency deals with competitors. Hospital networks abandoned Nexera services entirely, unwilling to risk another blackout. For every lost client, the company forfeited not just revenue but credibility, an asset that, once shattered, couldn't be repaired by apologies or rebranding campaigns. Government agencies stepped in next. International regulators launched investigations, scrutinizing emails, decisions, and the audacity that led a billion-dollar infrastructure to be governed by personality rather than competence. The CEO, once proud of his unconventional leadership strategy, resigned before being forced out. His final statement referenced market misunderstandings, as though reality had simply misinterpreted his brilliance. The board, now without a figurehead, fractured into factions. Some blamed the influencer for incompetence. Others blamed the engineers who should have adapted. None blamed themselves, the architects of disaster who replaced years of technical stewardship with a social media smile and a belief that popularity equaled proficiency. Investors who had treated Nexera like a futuristic trophy learned a lesson older than technology itself. Charisma can captivate, but it cannot configure servers, restore databases, or replace fundamental expertise. Charm may unlock doors, but only competence keeps the building from collapsing. In Nexera's case, the building didn't merely collapse. It buried them. In the aftermath of Nexera's implosion, I found myself unexpectedly liberated. My phone no longer vibrated with demands. It rang with opportunities. Companies that once dismissed experience as old-fashioned thinking now begged for emergency interventions. They didn't want workshops, slogans, or inspirational pep talks. They wanted systems that worked. I founded a consultancy tailored for organizations that had learned, often painfully, that hiring charisma without competence is not a strategy, but a countdown. Within months, my weekly rate exceeded my former annual salary. I arrived at struggling companies not as an employee, but as a decision maker. Meetings that once belittled my expertise now paused when I spoke. I didn't chase respect. It was delivered out of necessity. My job was no longer to patch code. It was to teach leaders the value of structure, responsibility, and the quiet strength behind real expertise. Ironically, the very skills Nexera rejected became the backbone of my success. Meanwhile, Nexera transformed from a tech giant into a cautionary tale dissected in business schools and leadership seminars. Case studies analyzed the arrogance of prioritizing virality over viability. Professors held up screenshots of the podcast host's motivational bullet points as an example of how empires crumble when run like social media channels. The man himself vanished from the digital landscape. His followers, once entranced by his metaphors, moved on, leaving behind the ruins of a company that bet its future on applause. The board never issued an apology. They didn't need to. Their silence was louder than any statement they could draft. In the end, my revenge required no sabotage, no retaliation, no outburst, only absence. They replaced me with a voice. I replaced them with silence. And silence, unlike charisma, does not lie. It simply waits. Then it buries what deserves to fall.